Welcome to the Good Divorce Show, where we can help you learn how to navigate the journey of divorce with less conflict, less debt, and equip you not to just get divorced, but also learn how to be divorced. Your host, certified divorce coach Karen McNenny, shares her wealth of knowledge, gets advice from other relationship experts, and interviews couples who learn how to have a good divorce, so you can too. Now here's your host, Karen.
Hello and welcome to the Good Divorce Show. I am your Good Divorce coach, Karen McNenny. Thanks for joining us today as we bring stories from not only professionals, but also families and individuals who've walked a journey just like you, listeners, bringing you hope that divorce can be done with less debt, destruction, and despair. Today, I am chatting with Merriam Saunders. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, also a child custody recommending counselor for the Superior Court of California. We're going to hear more about that. In addition to her specialties in neurodevelopmental disorders and divorce, Merriam has authored several books on the topic, conducted numerous webinars and trainings, and teaches psychology at the graduate level. She is also a divorced mother of three wonderfully and I'm one of them. Miriam is also a divorced mother of three wonderfully neurodivergent young adults, and we're going to hear a little bit about their successful launch as well. Thanks for joining us here on the Good Divorce Show, Miriam.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk about this.
And you are one of these guests who has many stepping stones that has brought you into the field and really sharing a passion and your knowledge. And if you don't mind, I'm going to reach all the way back into your history as a child of divorce. Can you just give us a quick snippet about your own journey and then what has brought you into this work as you faced your own divorce experience? Let's go back in time. How old were you when your parents separated?
I was 15, 16 when they first separated, and it was not an amicable separation. They barely spoke. I had to actually get my own child support checks from my father because my mother refused to talk to him. And my father was very severe alcoholic at the time. So interacting with him was not always a pleasant experience. So I think, like many people who are drawn to becoming therapists, we have our own initial wounds that we, might wind up specializing in because we have experience in that area. So divorce was always an area that I was drawn to because I thought there has to be a better way than the way my parents divorce. And not that I ever wanted to go down that path myself. I wound up going down that path just a couple of years ago after what I consider to be a very successful and long marriage. We decided to end it. And as I always say, we simply redefined our relationship, and that new definition doesn't include marriage, but we're still in a relationship as parents and friends and family.
Well, you are really speaking to my heart and to our listeners here at the Good Divorce Show that we remind folks that marriage might be ending, but if there's children involved, your relationship is not done. And it really is a renovation. And what a gift to your children that you and their father recognized that as you were unraveling the marriage, but still retaining this really important co-parenting relationship. Is there an example of something that you all do together, or how you and the father of your kids connect that would just set an example or a little beacon of hope for other people who might be thinking, there's no way we would ever be able to sit together and have dinner or sit side by side at graduation, whatever the case may be?
Well, we have done both of those things.
Good for you.
We talk probably weekly, just check-ins on each other's lives, but also on the kids, because even though they are young adults, two of them are still launching, and they are still, very much in need of our support. And while we have both repartnered, for drinks with our new partners together, the four of us, we all had Thanksgiving together. We have, gone to my daughter's and son's graduation events and dinners together. It's comfortable. So I'm very happy that we've been able to do that, because I was committed to not, experiencing the way my parents did it. I
Right.
really didn't want to put my children through that. I feel bad enough as it was that we would be reshaping the family. And I knew my children, wasn't their first choice, but that if it was going to happen, I at least wanted it to happen in a way that made us all feel like we had a sense of family still.
Yeah, right. The family doesn't change. I mean, I love this language, this idea of reshaping. We've reshaped the family. And your kids currently, are they all in their 20s? Is that right?
They are. Yeah, 22, 24, and 26.
And so the youngest would have been about 20 when you and their father divorced?
Yes.
Yeah.
The younger two were still in college. The
Mhm.
older had just graduated.
Mhm.
And, was just moving into her apartment. And so I think for them, the greatest loss is the family home and having that shared place that we can all go back to. But as I constantly point out to them, it's very likely we would have sold it anyway. But the market was way too hot to sit on that thing. So, it would have looked different no matter what. And they don't realize it as much as I do, having lived through it myself, that while there is a sense of loss in this time, it's not going to last very long. They are doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is starting their own life
Mhm.
and and moving away from us as parents and spending time with us. And so it was going to look different anyway.
I think that we underestimate the need to still be active co-parents through that young adult 18 to 25-year-old, that sort of last stage of adolescence. And we underestimate what's happening for them. Like you said, that home base, they're kind of boomerang kids. They go out, they come back, they go out, and they still need the stability. Not to mention what's happening neurologically for them. Would you just put your nerd cap on for us a moment as the
Love to.
neurodivergent expert? And when we talk about adolescence, often people just think, well, at 18, then we're done parenting. That
Yes,
is a myth.
right. I know. And I think there are a lot of people who think I'm probably headed for divorce, but I'm just going to wait until the kids go to college. And it's probably not going to be any less of a shock or any less challenging for the kids. In fact, if anything, it might be a little more or just very different anyway, because there
Mhm.
is no home base for them to come to. They're going off living at college or whatever they choose to do. And during summer breaks, when everyone else goes home, their home might not be that same place. That can also delay grief and prolong it too, as their adjustment period might just be a little bit longer. And then in terms of neurotypical kids, their prefrontal cortex isn't really consolidating until the mid-20s anyway. So that sense of understanding consequences and being able to make thoughtful decisions, not act impulsively, they're not quite there yet. They're still the center of their own world and making decisions emotionally. And then if you layer on top of that neurodivergency, well, that prefrontal cortex is already coming in a little behind. We see that as maybe 1 to 3 years behind anyway. So your 18-year-old is really more like a 15-year-old
Mhm.
in their maturity and ability to organize their thoughts and um, pause
Yeah.
before acting.
Right, right.
Um,
And I can't help but wonder also, we have a generation now who's come through the pandemic. I think of my own son who's 18 and a senior, neurodivergent. And, the years when he would have been going off to summer camp on his own or starting a summer job a little bit here and there. Like there was a pause in their developmental experiences that I think still carry a shadow for that entire generation. So we already have a little bit of a delay in terms of launch or experiences that would predicate a successful launch, whatever that might look like. So you might have a double whammy going, parents.
I think we cannot underline that enough because we as older adults have so much life experience to draw on. The couple of years of the pandemic for us were a blip in our lifetime and probably didn't have as great an impact. But for our teenagers, our just launching young adults, 2 years was a really big portion of their life, and especially developmentally, what they, should have been going through. I notice even the difference between my younger two and my older, who really had maybe finished more of her milestones by the time the pandemic rolled around. It didn't impact her quite as much as it did the younger two. But the younger two, it really knocked them out at the knees.
Absolutely. And when we consider this launching of kids, something I've noticed, and because you've been working with divorced families throughout your career, and now you have your own children of divorce and being a child of divorce, is this idea that, well, once they're out of high school, then we don't really have to, cooperate or collaborate as co-parents. And you already identified, like, well, that's not really true. And I would even suggest those parents out there listening and thinking, well, we're just going to, tough it out for a few more years, wait till everyone's launched. The other thing that you miss out on in that is that while kids are still in our home, we begin to practice what it is to be a family that lives across two homes. We have a transition schedule. We know what Thanksgiving looks like. We know the nuances of each household and our parents. And suddenly, when kids kind of step off the cliff of their own independence, needing the tether, like, I don't know where I go for the holidays. We don't have an agreement. We'd have never had a schedule. And I've seen a number of children who have been in that. My parents waited, and then we all fell off the cliff because they didn't think they needed to talk anymore. Nobody's telling me what our Christmas, Thanksgiving plan is. And now suddenly that young adult child is becoming the mediator, the go-between, the negotiator in a relationship that might have been dead on the limb for years already. Any thoughts about how we help those families? We don't plan this and nobody knows how to do it until we're in it. But creating some support and recognition that we still have to be active co-parents and we still have to make a plan for our kids during those early years.
So glad that you bring this up, because that was one of the worst experiences for me as a young adult of recently divorced parents, because when the kids are over 18, there is no custody arrangement, there is no parenting plan. And we think, they're old enough, they can make their own decisions. Being left with the decision of who to spend Christmas with, even if you're 21, is an awful thing to have to decide. So if I picked my mom, I felt awful that my dad was left alone that day. And if I picked my dad, then I felt guilt that, my mom was going to think I preferred my dad.
Mm-hmm.
So even as someone in their early 20s, I would recommend that you still tell them, this year, mom is going to host Christmas. Next year, it's going to be dad, if the two of you, aren't in that yummy place where you can spend Christmas together. And take that off the table for them. Listen to what they have to say, and don't be surprised if they decide they're going to go to Hawaii with their best friend for Christmas and avoid you altogether. But still think that certain young adults still can appreciate that level of parenting and authority and feeling like mom and dad still got this. They're still in control. They're, running, someone's driving the train. And it's not me, because I'm just learning how to drive it and it's scaring the pants off me.
And furthermore, at any age, kids do not want to choose. And I think that's what you're emphasizing. When you were left with that place to choose, and whether it be holidays, I was just coaching a family, child launched to college, living on the dorm, on campus, all their stuff in one place for the first time in 12 years since they've been living across two homes. But year 2 decided, you know what? I'm not going to live on campus. The expense is a lot. I'm glad I had the experience. I'm going to live at home. Now I have to choose which home. Some parent is going to feel, but they were very clear, the child, like, I'm not going back and forth anymore. I'm over that. I'm over being the ping pong child. So you're all going to have to sort it, just deal. And sometimes there's one room or one home that's closer to campus, or one home that has more space, or one home where the beloved pet is, or closer to the dear friend. And the child might be leaning one way or the other. And I would just really emphasize to all of you listening who might have young adult children to not guilt them and not persuade them, but to both parents really create an open heart approach of like, we're here to support you. What's going to be best for you? Like always, we're putting you at the center of these decisions, not in the middle and not in the war.
Oh, I love the way you put that. Yeah, that's really a great way, a great message to give is that, all of our decisions are considering you, but they're not, tugging at you.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, wonderful to enter into this deep conversation about divorce. I want to hear a little more about this professional role that you've taken on with the courts there in California, and give us some education. I think a lot of us don't know what that role would be, how it would serve a family, and really what has surprised you in that role.
So the role is essentially a government position that used to be private for me, whereas clients would come to me in the past and hire me as a private custody mediator. Now I'm working directly for the courts in that same capacity. And so in California, and I don't know if this is a law in other states as well, but if you file for divorce and you don't have a custody agreement, California sends you to mediation. They want you to give you an opportunity to see if you can sort it out yourselves before standing before a judge, who, might impart that decision for you. And then in varying counties, there's also an opportunity for that mediator to perhaps talk to your children or the family therapist or teachers to gather more information. And then if the judge needs more information, they might send the party back to a recommending mediation session where if the couple still can't come to an agreement, then I will make a recommendation to the court on what I feel is in the children's best interest. So in private mediation, I never got to interface with the court, and I could work with a family for sometimes years if they just,
Cannot figure
lingered
it
and could
out.
not. Right. This is extremely brief. You have your 2 hours, and if we can hammer out an agreement, great. If not, the judge is going to do it for you, or maybe send you back to me, and then I'll make a recommendation. And either way, you're not deciding for yourself.
Can you share a little bit of what are the criteria that you take into consideration when making a recommendation?
It all has to be based on best interest of the child. So the factors are things like the child's age, stage of development, their attachment not only to their parents, but also to their current living arrangement. So current schedule, current school, current community, the parent's ability to care for the child, but also their willingness to facilitate the child's relationship with the other parent. And then any safety related concerns, ongoing substance use, any acts of domestic violence, child abuse, and things like that. Those are essentially the factors we look at. And the status quo is a big one. If you've been operating under something that the children have adjusted to, and then one parent wants to change that, we really need to see, well, why? What's the change in circumstance that would upset this apple cart, and give us a good reason. And then I think one of the most challenging things to work on is when one parent wants to move far away. That tears at my heart so much. But we're seeing more and more of that because, especially in California, it's just very expensive to live here. And after the pandemic in particular, things have just become even more expensive.
Yes.
And so people need to leave just to be able to support their families, but that's going to split the family even further. And
yeah, I think a lot of your California neighbors are becoming my Montana neighbors.
Yeah, yes.
And frankly, I can't blame them, but we're getting a little crowded up here in the north, which I say tongue in cheek because I think there's still only 1 million people in the entire state of Montana, which is
right. Right. Well, it's those 10-month winters.
That's right. You got to be tough to come north. Well, what a heartfelt and important job to be helping families in determining some of those custody decisions, and really the heartbreak when families just can't come to terms on their own. And you're right, post-pandemic, more people can work remotely, they can find more locations where it might be less expensive. And then those become really big conversations for parents to have, and how we're going to maintain a relationship with both parents. You mentioned a little bit about, the normalcy and attachment. I wonder if you would just dig a little deeper into maybe an attachment theory 101, why it matters, and at different ages that for any parent who's thinking, I don't want to support my kid's relationship with their other parent. Like, and there's parents who they're just like, I don't care about it. I actually want it all. I think they should have less. What would you say to those stubborn spirited parents who cannot see beyond their own hurt and pain and betrayal and resentment to understand why it's so important that the child has equal opportunity to build relationship with both parents? Again, absent of
Yeah,
violence,
safety.
addiction, safety.
Well, I think it often falls on deaf ears, but there has been a lot of research that indicates that access to both parents shows the best outcomes for children developmentally as they get older. It helps them become emotionally intelligent adults, and it only helps them with their own relationships later in life. And I think that some parents feel as though the other parent maybe isn't as good of a parent, and so they use that as a reason why that parent shouldn't have as much time with the child. And that very well may be the case. That other parent just might not be as good a parent as you. But it isn't necessarily a bad thing for the child. They have to navigate a challenging relationship, maybe. They have to navigate a home that maybe doesn't do as much for them, which maybe in the end will help them become more self-reliant and independent. And giving that other parent an opportunity to spend time with the child only gives them practice to become, hopefully, we hope, a better parent. I do see a lot of what we call gatekeeping parents.
Say more about that.
It is, well, when the family was intact, we often make agreements, right? I'm going to be the primary caregiver parent, and you're going to be the parent maybe that goes out and into the workforce and brings the money. And even if we're both earning an income, oftentimes we divide the home life in certain ways. And so when a divorce happens, that parent who might have had the larger share of the home life responsibilities often feels very attached to them, speaking of attachment, and believes that the other parent just simply can't do them, doesn't know how. And then if you throw a neurodivergent child into the mix, where that primary parent really is the one who set up the systems, understands the child's diagnosis, is the one interfacing with therapists, there can become a lot of fear that the child might actually be somehow, in danger in the other family, because that other parent just hasn't really been the one involved and they don't know how to do all the things. And then if you're not working together because you can't stand each other, then you might not want to share that information with the other parent because you can't stand them. And they might not want to listen because they feel like you're just trying to control what's happening in their home, when really you're just trying to help your child in that home. So I feel like I just meandered into this other topic, so I'm not even sure where I started. But I think you asked me about attachment, and I wound up talking about gatekeeping parents. But
Well, it's all connected, right? When you've got a parent who is feeling entitled or righteous about their role or what it was going into towards the divorce. I just heard a mother say, like, absolutely, mom should have more time. We menstruate, we have the uterus, we have the mammary glands, and we absolutely should have more time than the dads. And I thought, wow, that's going to be a hard battle. And realizing that, they're lifelong relationships, these parent-child I mean, all of us adults, we know. My parents are in their 80s and we're still working it all out. Parents who are gatekeeping, it very well could be at the expense of your child's future healthy relationships, their mental health, what they might need when they're 20 or 30, which might not any longer be mom's, soft touch and book reading, be something that the other parent, and again, we're talking about same-sex marriage as well. I always want to make sure that we're fully inclusive, that we've got parent A, parent B, and whatever the gender or identification is irrelevant. Kids come with a desire and a need to attach to whomever their caregivers are.
Yes, 100%. And I always, when I hear a should, like, well, mom should get more time, or I deserve more time, or I need more time, I want more time, I typically wind up saying, I don't care what you want, what you need, what you deserve. What we're talking about is your child and what your child needs and deserves. And because your marriage didn't work out does not mean that your child deserves any less time with either parent. So, we always have to reorient them to remembering that it's really no longer about you and what you want. Your decision was to change the shape of your family, but your child deserves to still have access to both parents.
Absolutely. We are chatting today with Merriam Saunders. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, but also comes with a unique specialty in raising neurodivergent children across 2 homes. And when we come back from the break, we're going to hear a little bit more about how to recognize neurodivergency in your children and what they need from both their parents across 2 homes so that they can continue to excel and grow and launch successfully into their young adult life. Stick with us here at the Good Divorce Show. We'll be right back.
Are you thinking about getting divorced? Before you call a lawyer, call the Good Divorce Coach, Karen McNenny, a certified divorce counselor, co-parenting specialist, and mediator. Karen's signature Good Divorce experience will guide you through your divorce journey, from the day you make that difficult decision to the day the decree is signed, all for a predictable fee. The Good Divorce Coach will teach you and your partner how to get divorced and be divorced with less conflict and less debt. Visit thegooddivorcecoach.com to get in touch with Karen.
Now, back to the show with Karen.
Welcome back to the Good Divorce Show. I am Karen McNenny, your Good Divorce Coach. Today we are chatting with Merriam Saunders. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a child custody recommending counselor for the Superior Court of California. She has raised 3 beautiful neurodivergent children. She identifies also as her own ADHD beautiful self. And I want to dive in a little bit with you, Merriam, to first just start with some fundamentals. When we talk about neurodivergent, and it's a little bit of a new phrase, it's encompassing a lot. Can you give us some broad strokes of what we mean when we use this umbrella of neurodivergent?
Yes, it's definitely a buzzword that I think can be a little bit confusing for people. So we are all neurodiverse, right? It basically just means we all have a brain and all of our brains are different, thus the diversity. Those of us that are in the majority are referred to as neurotypical. Our brains act in a way that, is expected and just typical. And then there are some of us who diverge a little bit from the typical. Those tend to be people with ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, and then there are those that might argue that OCD, Tourette's, and some other maybe anxiety disorders might also be under that umbrella of neurodivergence. But essentially means you still have a brain, it just acts a little bit differently than is expected, and that difference sometimes makes operating in a neurotypical world challenging. And so the more understanding we have of neurodivergence and the more space we make for people who are differently brained, the easier it will be for those people to operate in that world. And it's coming slowly but surely.
Yes, I do think it's becoming more mainstream, more accepting, more accommodating, even recognizing that as a parent who's navigating neurodivergent within our own family. And, there was a time where we didn't have a diagnosis. We had some indicators. And I know families where there might be one parent who's really leaning into this process and recognition and wanting to get their child support. And there might be one parent who's like, whatever, They're just bouncy. They just are a daydreamer. They just fill in the blank. And we, as a result, don't necessarily get the support that that child needs. And now, if you put that family across two homes and you have one parent who's really devoted to supporting that child and recognizing their neurodivergence, and one family who's more dismissive about it. Have you run into that as well in your own practice? And what do we do with it when even the parents are not in agreement?
Oh yeah, maybe just a little bit. So, the challenge is that if you have a child with a diagnosis of diabetes, or they need eyeglasses, those things are understandable. They're medically evident. But ADHD, autism, they result in a change in behavior. So the symptoms are typically noticeable differences in behavior. And because of that, we all have a tendency to think that behavior is something you can control. You're behaving one way, just don't do that. Behave differently, behave better. And what we fail to understand is that these behaviors are driven by a different brain, and that these children typically don't have control of those behaviors, not innately anyway. We really need to scaffold the learning around what to put in place to get a different set of behaviors. And then when you're talking about that prefrontal cortex that is, 3 years behind, oftentimes families have an expectation that this child should just be operating differently. You don't expect your 6-year-old to be operating in the world like a 3-year-old, but that's pretty much what their brain is doing. So even without a divorce, there are often parents who disagree because one who, maybe is staying at home and really seeing these behaviors throughout the day might be far more concerned than the other parent who might only be witnessing them for a couple of hours, or they're more the play parent and it's just not as noticeable for them. And so, you just need to learn to sit still, or,
Right.
you just need to focus and listen when I tell you the first time. And you just need to, oh my gosh, if only. I mean, if they
Oh,
could, why wouldn't they? Of course
why
they
wouldn't they?
would. So
That's right.
then,
And they wish they could. They're in their
yeah,
own frustration when everyone is telling them, like, just do it different. Why can't you? You should, right? Though those phrases, I think, just makes that child feel so disempowered. Like, yeah, I don't know why I can't. And then the self-loathing and the shame starts to build. And
absolutely.
no, that's not helpful.
No, it's not. Self-esteem is the hardest hit usually with these kids, and one of the most important things to try to preserve. And so often you'll have one parent who's working really hard to try to accommodate things that these behaviors, put things in place to try to help scaffold their kids at home, and working with the schools to try to put things in place at school. And the other parent will think it's a crutch. They need to learn to do it on their own. But as I often say, if your child broke their leg, would you tell them they need to, learn to maneuver on their own, or would you give them crutches, right? There's nothing wrong. If they needed glasses, would you say, just try harder to see? No, you would never
No.
say that. You would get them glasses. So accommodations are just eyeglasses for ADHD. And one of the most important things, well, usually for most kids with ADHD, is a sense of routine, because their brain is struggling so much around organization. The more organization you can just environmentally put in place, the easier it will be for their brain to kind of get on board, because their brain can't do it on its own. And so if you then two households and one is very organized, there are a lot of, routine expectations, the child can kind of effortlessly glide and really learn and take the time to develop the skills that they need. If it's not mirrored in the other home, then the other home might represent chaos for that child. And it might be just harder for them to consolidate any gains over time. It's going to take them longer. So in an ideal world, if you can, try to be open to listening to each other, and especially listening to the parent who may have been on the front lines of this diagnosis. And instead of thinking that they're trying to control the way you parent in your home, if you can accept their help and listen to what is working for them, and maybe share what is or is not working for you, it's only going to help your child. It isn't about the other parent trying to control you. It is only about helping the child. Now,
I just have to pause because I think that's just so important, Miriam. It is just because we already, by the very nature of living across two homes, there's all sorts of boundary making. Like, you're not in charge. If I want to feed him Fruit Loops, I'm going to feed him Fruit Loops. If I'm going to let him stay up late, I'm going to let him stay up late. Like, people they dig in their heels and like, my house, not yours. You're not in charge. And for the most part, I do tell parents, like, you actually don't get to decide the menu at the other house unless what we're talking about here is it is for the good of the child. And if we know that this child's going to do better at school because they get 8 to 10 hours of sleep, or that they have less sugar in their diet, or they know where to find their backpack and their shoes when they wake up in the morning, and that we have, what becomes routines when they're young, and then what becomes, like you were saying, these organizational, it's already chaotic to live across two homes. Let's just admit it. Like, where the heck are the mittens today?
right.
I guess I left one at my other house. You did what? Why didn't you get?
No.
Are there practices, or I should say best practices or tools or hacks that you have seen that have been really beneficial to help bridge those two home similarities?
I am a big fan of online platforms, something like Our Family Wizard or Talking Parents, which I believe has a free version for those, who might need that. And I find the benefit of things like that. Well, one of the biggest benefit is the shared calendar, because these platforms promote the sharing of information. And when you have, like you're mentioning, it's already chaotic, but when you're layering in ADHD, then the more that you can communicate with each other around types of things that you're doing, and hey, there's a parent meeting next week at the school, or Johnny was just assigned a project. It's not due until Friday and he's going to be with you on Thursday. Can you make sure that steps C through M are, completed? Those types of things. Our Family Wizard, or there are on any number of these online platforms. That's just the one I like the best.
And I have a lot of clients who use it as well. And remembering when I say, hey, there's a project coming up, can you do this work over the weekend, or this that night, or they need to study? It's not me micromanaging my other parent. It's me helping all of us succeed on behalf of the child. That's the paradigm shift.
Yes. I would like to say, if you are the parent who is, banging their head up against the wall because the other parent simply refuses to acknowledge the diagnosis or put any of the helpful things in place in their home, don't despair. And try not to operate from a constant place of fear that, awful things are going to happen to your child as a result. Because as I think I mentioned earlier, your child already is facing somewhat of a challenging world, and people who may not accept the diagnosis might think they're weird, might think, their behaviors are something they can control. And having a place that they live be one of those challenges isn't always the worst thing in the world, right? But they will likely survive it. And the fact that you have really solid options in your home and you have put in place everything they need eventually will give them the skills that they need to carry into the other home themselves. They might be the driver at that point. Hey, mom or dad, or other mom or other dad, this really works for me in my other home. We need to do this here too.
Even like the calendar, those online platforms, and parents always know when is transition day, how long am I going to have the kids, what are we going to do over that weekend? But I'm a real fan of making sure the kids also know what their schedule is and posting that in the house, or making sure that they have access to a shared family calendar so that they know, especially as they start to get into high school or even middle school, making plans with friends. Like, where am I going to be? Where am I sleeping this weekend? Am I near my friend's house? Am I not? Can I have a slumber party? I don't even know which parent to ask. Have you run into some of either resistance or best practices around just how much information the child gets so they can start to self-manage?
Yes, well, if your child is old enough and can access, an online shared calendar, then absolutely. I've also seen, there are low-tech options where you could simply put a paper calendar up on the
Yeah.
wall, and then even put a picture of your house and a picture of the other house on the calendar days where the child transitioned. And especially for a child that might run a little anxious, I think sometimes this can be really helpful for them to refer to. It gives them a sense of control because a lot of this leaves them feeling very out of control. A child with ADHD typically feels pretty out of control as it is. They can't even control their own brain and their own body most of the time. And now, they're living in two homes and they're having even less control. So giving them an opportunity to see a visual and an understanding of like, okay, I have 3 days here and then I go and see my other parent, can ease that anxious feeling. But also sometimes be careful not to talk about things that are going to happen down the road too far in advance as well, because you can almost create fear and worry where you don't need to. So if it's something that they might be a little anxious about, don't give them too long of a runway to get anxious about it.
I think there's real wisdom in that. And that's a little counterintuitive. So there's sort of a sweet spot for anxious kiddos of I'm giving you enough notice to prepare, but not so much that you spend the next month
ruminating about it. Yeah.
Just spinning, churning and spinning and churning. Yeah, absolutely.
And I recently saw, I don't know who makes it, but it is a technological calendar, but it hangs on the wall and it was really big and has lots of colors and it's supposed to be user friendly for children as well. So if you are interested in more in those technologies, it seems like there's a calendar you can put on your wall, but that you can change it online. And so that might be something that you could mirror across both homes as well.
Mm-hmm. As you talk about kiddos and their anxiety and their busy brains and sometimes feeling out of control and trying to meet them and help them understand their own self, you have a wonderful passion for writing and you've taken that writing and put it to good use and have several books for the adult as well as the youth audience. And I would just be delighted if you would share with our listeners your whole library and a little snippet so that folks can run down to their local bookstore, some online shop, but where we can find specifically your book resources. And then we'll talk about some of the other services and resources that you're providing to families.
Oh, thank you. I love writing, definitely a passion. And I started writing almost as therapy after I put my kids to bed when they were little, because I had an idea for a book, just like everyone else. And it was awful. It was a young adult novel. It wasn't about vampires at least, but anyway. And then I wound up thinking my kids were in middle school and had ADHD, and there really wasn't a book for them where they could see themselves. The only representation of ADHD at the time was the lightning thief. But even that character, if you're familiar, his ADHD is because he's half Greek god. It wasn't even actually just ADHD. So I thought, well, that's, kids out there can't use that as an excuse. So I decided I would write a middle grade novel about a boy who has ADHD, but who also has a lot of other really wonderful qualities that wind up saving the day. So while he initially identifies as that kid who's always in trouble, it's his strengths that wind up getting everyone out of trouble at the end of the book. And he's also from divorced parents. So he's week on, week off, and there's a ticking clock because he's got to resolve his problems before he goes to dad's house the next week. And the parents don't get along and they don't agree about his ADHD diagnosis.
Wow.
In this
Everything
case,
between 2 pages here. What is the name of this book?
Trouble with a Tiny T, because in this case, this boy finds magic and he winds up bringing a tiny T-Rex to life in his bedroom that he needs to figure out how to get rid of before he goes to dad's house. So,
So that's one
While
of the books.
that's one of them. While I was waiting for my agent to sell that book, I penned a picture book about a boy with ADHD who goes through his day getting in trouble. And at the end of the day, when he crawls into bed, his mother says, all right, I've got to talk to you about something. And he thinks he's about to get in trouble again. But instead, she pulls out a notebook and she reads to him all of the things he did right that day. And it's called His Wonderful Book. And it leaves him with, a sense of, I'm not just a bad kid, that I also did a lot of great things today as well. That book is called My Whirling, Twirling Motor. And then after that, I wrote that sister publication, My Wandering, Dreaming Mind, which is similarly a girl who, because of her inattentive ADHD, her self-esteem is really hit throughout the book. But then her parents have little notes in a jar that she pulls out at bedtime that tell her how wonderful she is as well. So those are the 3 children's books. And I have another one coming out next year, which is called You Can Say Hi with Only a Smile, and is about the various ways of non-vocal communication.
Mm-hmm.
And then for adults, there is mindfulness meditations for ADHD, which is 100 different exercises, mindfulness exercises if you have ADHD. Most people think like ADHD and meditation. I don't think so.
Possible.
But meditation isn't simply sitting there with an empty mind for 20 minutes, because that's like a nightmare for someone with ADHD. There are a lot of different ways of meditating, including active meditations where, walking through a forest and digging in the dirt. So most of these meditations are easily accessible, active meditations. And then on topic is divorce and the ADHD autistic anxious child. In that book, I take you through creating a parenting plan if you have a child with any of those diagnoses.
Beautiful. What do you wish that you knew? This is a different way. What do you know now that you have learned through the journey of your career that you wish you would have known a little earlier on, or even as a parent, or what in the end became a family with a divorce?
I feel like I spent far too much time in a place of fear when my children were younger, and so much worry about them when they are older, and fear of, parenting them correctly and helping them in the right ways to make sure that could shepherd them to the best adulthood possible. And I didn't realize how small amount of time they'd be young relative to the rest of our lives. Like, I'm going to spend a lot longer with them in an adult relationship than I ever did in relationship with them as children. So for me, wish I just relaxed a little bit more and played a little bit more and not felt like I needed to be the best parent all the time, and really just made space for them to be who they needed to be. And I would say to families that are across 2 households, it would be to remember that your child will become an adult and they'll know what kind of parent you showed up as a child. You don't have to worry about whether the other parent is terrible. Your kids will remember. And if you show up as your parent self, playful and attentive and, just that solid object for them, they'll know it. And you don't have to worry about what the other parent was like.
That is just such a beautiful truth. And just not only be, the best version of yourself, but to know that a good enough parent actually is good enough. And we can carry our through kids a lot. And we don't have to write the story about their other parent. The children will write their own story, as it should be. Such wisdom today as we chat with Merriam Saunders, licensed marriage and family therapist, expert voice in how to raise neurodivergent children across 2 homes. You can find her on Facebook and How to Parent ADHD, or Instagram at How to Parent ADHD, website Merriam Saunders. You've got more resources there. Anything else you want us to know about where we can find you or how we can tap into more of your wisdom?
I think those are all the places. The books are on Amazon or your local bookstore.
Yeah. I'd like to end today with you reminding us about self-esteem when it comes to neurodivergence and ADHD in particular, and what it is that we can do. If a wounded self-esteem is kind of the kryptonite for kids, what's the antidote that parents can bring every single day to their children?
Well, just like the mother in the children's book that I wrote, that if you can tuck your child into bed every night and remind them of how wonderful they are, and follow it up with actual action items, things you noticed them do that day that you just tickled you, that's what they'll go to sleep remembering, and that's what they'll internalize.
Because they maybe have spent a day with people telling them, stop, don't, why can't you? So
Exactly.
truly, listeners, if this is your journey, and I'm talking to myself right now because I got one in my household, and there are days that I have just spent too much time emphasizing what didn't go right instead of all the things that did. Merriam Saunders, you are a gift to the field and a gift to the Good Divorce. So grateful that you came to chat with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was wonderful talking to you.
And listeners, I will remind you, everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end.
Thanks for listening. Do you have questions or thoughts about this week's episode? Let us know by following the Good Divorce Coach on Facebook and Instagram at Good Divorce Coach, and leave a comment. And be sure to tune in every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific, or listen anytime wherever you get your podcasts.